Okay, in today's iPad painting tutorial, I'm going to show you how to paint some winter icicles, and we're approaching Christmas, so it might be the kind of subject matter that you'd want to learn how to do. So I'm using the app Procreate, but you can apply these techniques to other apps, other programs, but there are certain brushes that I'm going to be using that you'll need to perhaps follow along with. So the first kind of brush that I'm going to be using on my A4 canvas is the soft brush, the medium brush, and they're both within airbrushing. And then if we go down to our organic brushes, I'm going to use the top one here, which is called Spires. I'm going to put this painting as my starting point. Now this is a painting I did as a tutorial, so if you want to check out this tutorial, you can do through my landscape tutorials. And obviously it's another wintry scene, so I felt it was going to be quite appropriate to add some icicles to this. So the colours that are going to appear in my final piece inside the actual icicles are going to be the colours that are here to begin with. The colours that I am going to actually apply typically are going to be just the colours that really like white and maybe some black. So like I say, I've got this painting open, and the first thing that I'm going to suggest that we do is we duplicate that layer. So whether you've got a photograph or a painting you've done that you think it would be good to add icicles to, the first thing we're going to do on our layer 1, so if we just untick the layer above it, and you won't really be able to see this because they're both exactly the same to begin with, but the first layer, we're going to go to our Gaussian blur. We want to affect the whole layer, and we're just going to slide it along to, I would say, about 20%. Now when I retick that box, you'll see now that we've got a clear version and a blurred version, one on top of the other. So the next thing I'm going to do on this top layer is I'm going to go to my selection tool. I'm going to put it on freehand. I'm just going to reduce the size of the canvas so you can really see what I'm doing. And I'm going to start somewhere in the section, not quite in the center, but you get the idea. And I'm also going to pick a section over here too. And because I've got those selected, you should be able to see the areas that are lined out. They're the bits that I haven't actually selected so far, but I do want to invert it. So I'm going to go down here, invert it. So now we've got the areas that I didn't select are now selected. So if I go to that layer, I can tap on it and I can clear it, and it will clear everything that was the inverse of what I wanted to select. So now you see I'm left with two shapes here that are clear, and then we've got the blurry background. So with these shapes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my transform tool, put it on freeform, and I'm going to squish them together till there's something really quite thin compared to what they were, something like that. And then I'm going to flip them horizontally. Now I'm also going to bring them in just a little bit from the bottom, still on the freeform, just a little bit like so. Now we've got two icicles there, and I want them to be a little bit different than each other. I might even make them a little bit shorter, in fact, and perhaps just a smidge narrower. But I want to make them a little bit different than each other. So what I'm going to do, so I'm on that layer that's got the clear shapes. I'm going to go to my smudge tool. I'm going to tap on it again, make sure that I've got the right kind of brush selected. And I want to use the hard brush, and I want to use it on about 4% size and 100% opacity. And what I'm going to start doing is just using that to round off or to extend the bottom, and also to add some shapes along the way. So it's not completely flat, so it has some personality, or rather it has some irregularities as it comes down to the end. And just want to really create some wobbles, some distortions there. Now I've had a go at using the liquify tool, and I have to say I think I prefer the smudge tool for this particular image. I find the liquify tool just wasn't quite doing what I wanted it to, so in this instance I think the smudge tool is going to suit us better. So before I do anything more, I've got two icicles there created, so I'm just going to duplicate it, and then I'm going to create some more. So I can really change the personality, change the character of them. So I have some smaller ones, maybe flip them the other way, maybe move them to a different part of our canvas. I can then merge those layers together by carefully pinching them, quite awkward. Then I can duplicate the layer again, and I can do something similar with the next layer. I can really just increase the quantity of icicles quite quickly, like that. So I'm going to pinch them together one more time. Okay, so we've got quite a lot of icicles now to work with. So I'm going to concentrate on a couple of them to begin with, and then hopefully you'll start to see the techniques, and then you can apply it over the rest of them with success. So the first thing I'm going to do is create another layer above our icicles. I'm going to go to our brushes. I'm going to go to our airbrushing brushes, and I'm going to use the soft brush for this. I'm going to select white. So if you're not sure how to select a pure white, just go to somewhere in the area of the white and double tap, and it will snap to the purest white. So now you can use that. And I'll turn the opacity down to around 50%, and I'll keep the brush at somewhere around 2%. And what I want to start doing is just defining the edge of our icicles. So I'll bring it down to something of a point. For this one, I'll go around the edge. Now I don't want it to be 100% really, because it's just going to be too sharp. I'm trying to build it up in some areas more than others, so that's why we've put it at the 50%. So I'm just going around, building up the brightness in some areas. Quite a lot of the outer edge is actually going to reflect back some of the white from the general scene. I think especially at the bottom is really going to catch the light. Anywhere there's almost like an underhang as well, so you've got a section here where it kind of underhangs, and almost there and there. Maybe have it picking up the light a little bit more. And then just a few points near the top, perhaps where it's picking it up as well. And then we can repeat that process across the different icicles. So if you still want to change the character and the general shapes of these, you can go back to that layer with the smudge tools still. So I'm going to select the hard brush, 100% opacity, still at the 4% size. And again, I can just continue to modify these, make them exactly how I want them. So I might actually just blur that in a little bit. Create a little bit more distortion in the center there. You can see on this one actually it's almost too straight. So if I just complicate that with a few wobbles in the center, and maybe for all of them, if they look like they're being a little bit too clear, you can just go in there, make them a little bit more complex. You still want to get this sense that there are trees coming through, so you can almost see the image that actually is in the background. Even though it's blurred, you'll see it in each of the icicles, but you don't want them to be absolutely pristine perfect, so we'll create these anomalies, but don't overdo it. Okay, go back to the top layer. We're still on the soft brush, still on 2% and 50% here, and still on the white. So I'm just going to move across all of these now and start adding some extra details around the edges of them. So I'm going to put some extra emphasis on the bottom like this. So if there's a lot of light in the sky, what tends to happen is that you'll have like a refraction, and the sky will be kind of represented whenever you get like a drop or a rounded shape, it kind of inverts it. So you'll notice that the light from the sky would be well represented here at the bottom. And also if you were to create like an area here, for example, so if I were to go back to my icicles and distort it in perhaps, and make a slightly rounded shape here, so I could further exaggerate that by just pinching it in. I might then want to use the white and start bringing it more into this section. So it almost forms like a round droplet shape, so it's starting to refract more of the sky whenever you get a kind of rounded bulbous shape. So again, on the bottom section here, we're going to add more of that white to represent the sky that's at the top. And then we'll vary the amount of white that we have along the edge. But anywhere where it starts to create a round shape, you just need to add more of that white at the bottom to represent the light at the top of the image. Just takes a little bit of getting your head round to understand that concept, but once you have, then it really starts to come together and really benefits shapes like this. So again, here we've got a little bit of a rounded shape. We can start to encroach on that area with the light from the sky. Same again here at the bottom of this icicle, so lots of the white. I'm just going to turn the opacity down a little bit to 40%. Just so I can soften it in a little bit more. It's quite strong at 50%, so we're just going to soften some of this white in places. So anywhere where it comes straight down and then it starts to create this kind of shape, So on that line, like here for example, it comes straight down, it may bulge out a little bit, but then it sharply comes back in and creates like an underhang in this section. That's where we do the more of that light colour. But then at the same time, you might get a section that points upwards and might just actually reflect the light straight back. So it catches the light or it refracts the light, and again, just increases the amount of white that you would see in both those cases. So the next thing we're going to do is create another layer, and I'm going to start creating some little air bubbles that are trapped within the ice. So we're going to go to our brushes. I'm going to choose a medium brush. I'm going to turn the size of the brush down to 1% and turn it up to 50% opacity. We'll keep it on the white, and in areas where it's going to be noticed, we're just going to create some round shapes or maybe a stretched ellipse. Sometimes they can be really tiny, just little points. Sometimes they can be quite big and cross over areas. You might get a noticeable cluster in some areas, and then other areas you're not going to have very many. For some bits, all you need to do is just a few white dots. And then what we can do is we can go to a black colour, so we can go to the black area on our disk, double tap, we'll go straight to the black. We can use black because we've got really dark colours in our scene. If you don't have really dark colours in your scene, then maybe just go for whatever is the darkest colour that you actually have. And then wherever you decide the light is actually catching the bubble, you're going to immediately follow up with a dark area too. So it might be, if I go back to the white, you can see at this top surface of the bubble, we're going to do more of the light. And then you can see immediately underneath that white, we have the black. So you can alternate between the two. If you feel like you need to go over it with the white, just to exaggerate that part of it, like that. And that's how we're going to build it up. Probably turn the size of the brush down a little bit. It's a little bit big, especially when you start zooming in. It's not really meant to be zoomed in to quite this extent. We're just after the overall effect. And then when you get really tiny bubbles, perhaps you don't need to add any of the black anyway. I mean, you can get away with almost not even using the black in many ways. So once you've done that, we'll create another layer. You've got enough of a sense of bubbles there to really move on to the next stage. We'll go to our brushes, we'll go to our organic brushes, we'll go to the Spires brush. We'll put that at around 3% and put it at 100% opacity, and we're using the pure white still. Now just zoom in a little bit, because what we want to do is just carefully go along the edge, but not go beyond the actual edge. We don't want it on the background at all. We just want it along the very edge. It can extend into the center somewhat, but you don't want it making an untidy line. And we're just going to start adding this. It's a really nice textured brush, because what you'll find on the surface of your icicle is that you'll get maybe snowflakes have stuck to it and instantly frozen to the side of it. Ice doesn't freeze exactly smooth like glass either. And you just get these kind of broken textures on the surface. If you've ever seen ice on a windscreen, for example, and there's moisture been on the windscreen, you can see how it all almost like branches and creates these weird patterns. And it's the similar kind of thing on the actual surface of an icicle. But we're not going to be able to, we're not zooming into a super macro level. We're going to be looking at it from a distance, but you can see the effect that it's already creating, and maybe you'd have more of a concentration of it towards the bottom. If you want to turn the size of the brush up, you can do a little bit, get some slightly bigger textures, but that is the general effect we're going for. So you can use a mixture of this brush, just letting the actual texture of the brush do the work for you in many ways. And then we can go back over it with our soft brush, with our airbrush, and actually start to manually put some extra shapes and things in there later on as well. So we'll move to our other icicles and we can repeat the process. In fact, there's a quicker way of doing that. We can go to the layer 4, we can duplicate it, and then we can go to the transform tool and we can move the bubbles that we've created and put them into another icicle. Now, if we want to change them up, we could always flip them horizontally, maybe change the scale of them so that they fit better. And if you don't want it to be noticeable as a duplication, you could just remove one or two of them to make it slightly more random, and perhaps it's not going to be as noticeable then either. Again, we can make another duplication of that layer, transform it, move it to another icicle, and repeat the process. Maybe with the eraser, just get rid of one or two of the ones that might give it away as being a duplication, and then you can start adding to what you've got in addition to those ones. And we'll just do that a few times, just because I want to get you to the point of the effect so you can see the overall effect. And then if you've got more time to spend on it, then you can add the bubbles more individually. But if I can just quickly show you how it looks, then we've achieved something just by doing that. You may get one or two random things that just stick out there, and we can deal with that one at a time. Go back to that layer, duplicate it again. I realised that this is not quite the same as actually drawing by hand every detail, but sometimes having quick fixes to get an overall effect can be really useful, and it helps you understand. If it's a small detail on a much bigger painting, perhaps this could be very useful. Okay, so we've got enough bubbles. What I'm going to do is just merge all of those bubble layers together now, so you can see they're all on one layer. Whoops, I've missed one, so I'll just collect that one as well. So you can see they're all on one layer now. If I wanted to go in, which I probably will do, and add just a few more now I can see perhaps where they are needed, so I'll just make sure I'm on the right brush still. So we need to go back to our airbrushing, stay on the medium brush. It should automatically set to the settings we were on before, so it should be on the 1% and the 50% there, and we're still on the white, so we can start adding more suggestion of bubbles. I'm not going to spend too long on the bubbles. Let's just get to the overall effect. There's one there that's gone a bit rogue, so let's get rid of that one. Let's go back to our top layer where we're adding that texture, and we'll go back to that same brush. So if we go back to our organic brushes on the spires, should be set to the same size, which was 3%, and then 100% opacity. We're still on the white, and then we just need to, in places, add some of this extra noise onto this top surface. Now there might be some areas where you don't want to add too much of this and you want to keep it a little bit clearer, and that's absolutely fine too. But there might be other areas where you really want to ramp up the amount of this that's on the surface, like there for example, maybe on the neighbouring one. Just make sure you're not going over the edge, otherwise it's going to lose that pristine look. If you do have any anomalies, like I was saying, you can just go back over with the eraser, just get rid of any of those things if they're not helping. You can turn the size of the brush up. If you've got a bigger area, start to go and just fill in. I accidentally shifted off that layer there, so we'll go back. And mixing up the layers here, it doesn't really matter. This is one of the dangers of working digitally, is that sometimes you just, especially if you undo, you double tap to undo something, you end up switching back to the layer you were working on previously. It's a constant hazard, something that happens all the time. But it doesn't really matter at this stage of this painting, so I'm going to leave that mistake and not worry about that. In fact, we'll merge those two layers just to show that it's not relevant, not important at this stage. So all the bubbles and all these extra textures now are on that same layer, doesn't matter. And we're just creating some extra noise on the surface of each of those. Like that. And we're almost there really in terms of the overall effect. What you could do perhaps, and I'll just create another layer here just in case it goes wrong, but we'll go back to our airbrushing and we'll go to our soft brush this time. We'll keep it on, I'll just move that so you can see, we'll keep it on 2% and we'll keep it on 40% opacity, and maybe just at the edges here and there we'll start creeping in some more texture running back left and right, but I really want to be not doing too much of that. We're going to turn the size of the brush down to 1% actually. So we'll just creep it in a little bit more here and there where we feel it's appropriate. Sharpen up and add some extra white in places if we feel like it's just not quite bright enough. Okay, I'm going to merge that layer down. I could refine and spend a little bit longer on these, but I feel like really we've done quite a nice job in terms of getting the overall effect. So now that we've got these layers merged, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my adjustments, my bloom. I'm going to choose the pencil option because I want to do this really sparingly, and I'm going to reduce the, I had to do this with my finger, reduce the extreme effect of the bloom down to put it at like 1%. And I'm also going to turn the opacity down to really low at around 5%, and I'm going to have the brush at around 10%. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use this to bring out the glow. This is what the bloom tool is really good for, the glow in some of these areas. Now, especially at the bottom where it's catching the light, we can really create a nice effect. And I could turn the opacity up a little bit more to maybe like 10%. Just to help speed it up a little bit, but you just got to be careful with this because you can easily overdo the effect and it will slightly ruin what you've got. So I'm going for an area here where I think perhaps it just needs to glow a little bit more extremely. So we've got the bottom sections, we've got any of the areas here, for example. Just be selective. You can always turn the size of the brush down even more and just go for a very specific area if you want to bring out the glow in that area. And you can just move across your canvas, find areas you really want to stand out with a glow, and just pick them out, and that is your finishing touch to your icicles. Something else you could do with your background layer is just make it a little bit darker, and there it's going to push the icicles forward as well. So you go to that background layer, you go to your adjustments, go to your hue, saturation and brightness. We want to affect the whole layer, and we'll just bring the brightness of the background down a little bit. I mean, you can take it quite far, but a little bit is usually enough. Well, that's what it was at the 50%, and we'll just reduce it by 5%, and it does quite a lot, really just doing that. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Do check out my other playlists, my other tutorials. If you subscribe, also make sure to press that bell notification button. There are links in the video description to my Patreon, to my other playlists. Check them out, hit the like button, and I'll see you next time.